Everyone in this room wants something from me. The voice cut through the dining hall like a blade laid flat on a throat. Soft, unhurried, worse than a shout. Mara didn't look up. She kept refilling the water glass. Steady hand, steady breath, invisible the way she liked it. That was the first mistake. Thinking she could stay invisible in his house, the Vale estate did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress that had learned to wear silk. Mara had worked there 9 days, long enough to learn the rules nobody wrote down. You did not speak first. You did not meet the family's eyes. You moved along the walls like weather, and if you did your job correctly, you were never seen at all. She was good at not being seen. She had been practicing her whole life. The dining hall tonight held 40 guests. Borrowed jewels, tailored threats wrapped in tuxedos, men who ran half the city and the women who'd learned to smile through it. The catering company had brought in extra staff for the dinner, and Mara had taken the shift because it paid double, and because doubling a small wage was the closest thing she had to a plan. She moved between the tables with a pitcher of iced water, refilling without being asked, vanishing before anyone thought to thank her. The chandelier above threw light like fractured glass. The conversation hummed low and careful. Even the laughter in this house came out quiet, as if it knew it might be overheard. At the head of the long table sat the reason for all of it. Dario Vale. Mara had heard the name before she ever saw the man. Everyone in the city had. You said it the way you said the name of an illness you were afraid to catch. The catering manager had warned the staff in the kitchen before the doors opened. Do not speak to him, do not look at him too long. Do not drop anything within his sight. And the girls had nodded, pale, and Mara had thought, privately, that the manager was being dramatic. Then she'd carried out the first tray and seen him, and she'd understood. He was not a handsome man exactly. He was something else. He looked like a door that only opened one way. He sat without leaning on anything, hands loose, eyes moving over the room slow and total, like a man counting his own money. When he spoke to the guest beside him, the guest leaned in as though receiving instructions from God. When he went quiet, the silence around him thickened until you could feel it on your skin. He looked, Mara thought, like a decision you couldn't undo. She told herself to stop looking. She filled the glass in front of her and moved on. She did not know that he had already noticed her, that he had noticed her on the second day, in fact, from a window. The round woman in the plain uniform who fed the stray cat behind the kitchen scraps from her own lunch. Who held the door for the gardener with his arms full, who did all of it when she believed no one was watching. Dario Vale watched everything. It was the only reason he was still alive. He had been watching her for 9 days, and he had not yet decided what she was. Tonight he intended to find out. It happened between the 3rd course and the 4th. A lull fell over the table, the natural pause when wine has loosened the room, but the next dish hasn't arrived to give the hands something to do. Into that lull, Dario Vale set down his glass. The small sound of crystal touching wood was enough. 40 people stopped talking. Everyone in this room wants something from me, he said. Mara was at the sideboard, her back to him, returning the empty pitcher. She froze. Don't turn around. Don't make it worse. It's not about you. Money, Dario went on, unhurried. Protection, my signature on something, my silence on something else. Everyone at this table came here tonight with a hand half out. He let the words sit. I find it tiring, don't you? A few uneasy laughs. Someone said, Dario, you wound us, in a voice that was trying very hard to be light. He didn't smile. So let's play a game, he said. An honest one. Someone in this room will answer it truthfully, and I'll know if they don't. Mara turned, slowly, because everyone else had turned, and standing still would have made her more visible, not less. She kept her eyes down. She willed herself smaller. It didn't work. You, Dario Vale said. The word landed in the silence like a coin dropped on marble. Mara felt 40 heads swivel, felt the heat of them, and understood with a sick lurch that he was not looking at the senator's wife, or the banker, or the man with the gold rings. He was looking at her. Sir, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Come here. She crossed the room. It took 100 years. She was aware of every step, of the way the uniform pulled across her shoulders, of the round of her own face under the merciless chandelier, of the faces tracking her, amused, pitying, irritated that the great man's game had landed on something so unremarkable. At the far end of the table, a woman in red silk watched with a smile like a paper cut. Celeste, the wife of Dario's cousin. Mara didn't know her name yet. She only knew the look. She'd been getting that look her whole life. She stopped a careful distance from his chair. Closer, Dario said. She stepped closer. He studied her the way other men studied ledgers. Slow, complete, deciding which column she belonged in. Up close, he was worse and somehow less frightening at once. There was a thin scar through one eyebrow. There were shadows under his eyes that money couldn't pay off. He was tired, she realized. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Here are the rules, he said, for the room as much as for her. I ask one question. You answer honestly and you keep your job. You lie to me, the pause again. He was a man who understood that a pause could do more than a sentence, and you don't. Do you understand? What do you want from me? The question hung there. Mara understood dimly that there was a correct answer and 100 wrong ones, and that the correct answer was probably some flattery, some smallness. Nothing, sir. I just want to do my job, sir. She understood that the whole table was waiting to watch her grovel, and that the man in red silk's wife was already savoring it. She was so tired she thought of the bus she would miss if this ran late. She thought of the rent. She thought of how many times in her life she had made herself small enough to fit through someone else's narrow door. She looked up. She met his eyes, the thing the manager had said never to do. Nothing, she said. The laugh that had been building at the far end of the table died in Celeste's throat. You could hear the chandelier hum. Nothing, Dario repeated. Not a question. He was testing the weight of the word in his own mouth, the way you test a step before you put your weight on it. I want to finish my shift, Mara said. The strange thing, the thing that surprised her more than it surprised him, was that her voice had stopped shaking. I want to catch the last bus, and I want to go home, that's all, that's everything. She paused. You asked for honest. That's honest. Nobody spoke to him at all unless he asked, and even then they spoke in the careful, padded language of people walking on ice. He had built a life in which every sentence aimed at him was a fishing line with bait on the end. This one had no hook. He leaned back. The chair did not creak, because everything in his house was the kind of expensive that doesn't make noise. He looked at the round, plain woman who wanted nothing from him, and for one impossible second, half a breath, no more, the corner of his mouth moved. What's your name? Mara, sir. Mara Quinn. Mara. He said it slowly. He said it like a man turning a stone over to read the underside. Leave the picture. Sit down. A ripple went around the table. Sir, I'm working. I can't. Mara. He said her name again, and this time there was iron under it. But also something else, something she couldn't name and didn't trust. Sit. Down. She looked at the empty chair that a guard had silently pulled out, at his right hand, the seat of honor, the seat that should have gone to the senator, and she sat in it because she did not know what else to do. And across the room, Celeste's wine glass tightened in her manicured fingers until the crystal stem went white. Because she had just watched the most dangerous man in the city pull out a chair for a woman everyone else looked straight through. Celeste did not forget things like that. Celeste collected them the way some people collect debts. They moved her the next morning. It came as a folded note slid under the door of the staff bunk where the live-in catering girls slept. Miss Quinn is reassigned to household staff, effective immediately. Report to the East Wing. No explanation. The other girls read it over her shoulder and went very quiet. And by the time Mara had packed her single bag, none of them would meet her eyes. The East Wing was a different country. The kitchens where she'd worked were loud, bright, human, clattering pans, somebody's radio, the cook who shouted but didn't mean it. The East Wing was carpeted in a silence so deep it felt like deafness. Heavy doors. Men in dark suits who stood very still and tracked her with their eyes and never spoke. Rooms she was told to clean but not to look at, where the desks held papers turned face down and the air smelled of cigar smoke and decisions. Her new job had no name. Officially, she was household. In practice, she poured his coffee in the mornings and stood in the corner of rooms where deals were made in 3 sentences and someone always left paler than they'd arrived. She learned fast that the standing in the corner was the actual job. Dario Vale liked her there. He never said so. But when she was absent, when she was sent to fetch something, he would glance at the empty corner, and the glance was enough to send a guard hurrying to find her. She didn't understand it. She told herself not to try. She watched, because watching was what she'd always done, and she remembered things because remembering was the one talent she had never been able to switch off. The faces, the names, who flinched when, who said one number out loud and wrote a different one down. She filed it all away without meaning to. She had been doing it since she was a child, and she had never once stopped to ask herself why a child would learn to memorize the dangerous people in a room. The rest of the staff hated her now. The promotion smelled like favoritism, or worse, the kind of favor a powerful man does a plain woman that everyone assumes has a price. They stopped saving her a seat at the staff meals. Someone left a folded paper in her cleaning cart with a single ugly word on it. The housekeeper, a thin woman named Iris who ran the staff like a prison yard, found 100 small ways to make the day longer. Only one person spoke to her kindly. An old woman who worked in the laundry. Gray hair pinned tight, eyes too sharp for her bent back, hands like paper that had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. She pressed the linens and the family's shirts in a hot back room that smelled of starch, and on Mara's second day she handed her a cup of tea without being asked, and said, "Sit a minute. You look like you haven't sat down since you were born." She had worked in the house, she said, longer than anyone living, longer than Dario had owned it, longer than his father. On the third day, as Mara was leaving the laundry, Pia caught her sleeve. The old hand was surprisingly strong. "You should run," Pia whispered. Her eyes had gone wide and frightened, and the fright made her look suddenly much older. "Get out of this house, before he remembers where he's seen your face. I've been a waitress for 9 days. Before that, I was nobody. He couldn't have..." "Child." Pia's grip tightened until it hurt. Her voice fell to almost nothing. "I have. 20 years ago, in this house." Her eyes searched Mara's, desperate pleading to be believed. "And you had a different name." Mara didn't sleep. A different name. The words lay on her chest all night like a hand pressing down. Here was the truth she had never told anyone in the house. Because it was the truth she barely let herself look at. Mara Quinn was not her name. Not really. It was a name the state had given her, the way you give a name to a stray, because the paperwork needs a line filled in. She had grown up in a series of foster homes with no history before the age of 7. Before 7, there was simply nothing. A blank wall, a door she had stopped knocking on years ago because no one ever answered. The social workers had called it trauma. Sometimes the mind protects itself, one of them had said gently, by closing a door. They had not been able to tell her what was behind it. There were no records. There was a little girl found alone, half-starved and silent, who would not or could not say where she had come from, and so the state had named her Mara Quinn, and the door had stayed shut for 20 years. But it was not, she had come to understand, completely shut. Because sometimes, at the worst moments, never the good ones, a fragment came loose and floated up. A long hallway with many doors. A man's voice, warm and low, saying, "Count the doors, little one. Always count the doors, so you always know the way out." The smell of gun oil and oranges, somehow together, somehow comforting. A woman screaming a name into smoke, a name that was not Mara, a name Mara could never quite catch before she woke. She had spent her whole life teaching herself not to chase those fragments. You couldn't eat a memory, you couldn't pay rent with a smell. The door was shut and the people behind it were gone. And a girl with no past learns early to live entirely in the present, to make herself small and useful and unremarkable, because the unremarkable are not asked where they come from. Now the buried thing was clawing up through the floor of her and lying in the narrow staff bed in the most dangerous house in the city. Mara was no longer sure which she was more afraid of, that the door would open and show her something terrible, or that she had always, somewhere underneath, known exactly what was behind it. Always count the doors. She got up before dawn and, without deciding to, walked the east wing in the dark and found that she already knew where every exit was. She had counted them on her first day without realizing she was doing it. So you always know the way out. She stood very still in the silent hall, cold all over, and understood that whatever Pia had recognized in her face was real. The car came on a Tuesday. She was crossing the front courtyard with his afternoon coffee. Black, no sugar, in the heavy cup he preferred, balanced on a small tray. When the black sedan came through the front gate too fast, later she would not be able to say how she knew before she knew. The guards at the gate hadn't reacted yet. The car was simply a car, moving simply too quickly. But something in the old, locked part of her, the part that counted doors, flooded her with cold a full second before the rear window came down. And the thing that came out of the window was not a face. It was the dark, perfect circle of a barrel. Time turned to syrup. She saw it with terrible clarity. The coffee cup left her hand. She felt it go, felt the absence of its weight. And she did not have time to be afraid, only time to think. Absurdly, I miss the bus, a thought from a different life. Someone shouted, far away. Too slow. Then the world hit her sideways, and it was not the bullet, it was him. Dario Vale had crossed 30 feet of gravel in the time it took her heart to beat once. He hit her at the waist and took her down behind the low stone wall of the fountain. His whole body wrapped around hers, turning so that his back was to the gun and her face was pressed to the dark wool of his shoulder. The shots cracked off the marble where her head had been a half-second before. Crack, 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 chips of stone stinging her cheek. His arm was iron across her back, his mouth was at her ear, and his voice was calm. Lethal and level and calm, like he was correcting a wine order. Stay down, he said. Don't move. You're mine to keep alive. Nobody touches what's mine. She couldn't have moved if she'd wanted to. She was crushed against the ground, and against the heat of him, the gravel biting her palms, the world reduced to the smell of his cologne and the impossible steadiness of his breathing, while gunfire chewed the air above them. Then his men were moving. She heard them more than saw them. The flat, hard sounds of return fire, organized, unhurried, the sound of professionals. The sedan's tires screamed. Someone gave a single short command in a language she didn't know. Glass broke, the engine roared and then choked, and then there was a sound like a great hand-crumpling tin, and then silence. 9 seconds, start to finish. Maybe 10. The sedan sat crooked against the gatepost, smoking, its windows gone. One door hanging open. One of Dario's men walked toward it with his weapon up, calm as a man going to check the mail. But the courtyard was full of people, staff who had come to the windows, guards along the wall, gardeners frozen with their tools, and on the wide front steps, Celeste, in a white dress, one hand at her throat, watching. They had all just watched Dario Vale shield a household servant with his own body, take a position between her and a loaded gun. A man who, in living memory, had never stepped in front of anything for anyone, who let other men die in front of him, because that was the order of the world, had thrown himself over a woman everyone in the house looked straight through. Nobody who saw it would ever forget it. Celeste, on the steps, did not forget it either. But where the others felt awe, Celeste felt something colder. She had spent 15 years married into this family, smiling at its table, never quite given a seat that mattered. And she had just watched the man at the center of everything spend his own body to protect a waitress. Her smile, when she finally found it again, was a paper cut that had decided to become a wound. He didn't let go right away. That was the part that undid her. The shooting had stopped. The sedan was a smoking wreck. The threat was over. Plainly, completely over. And still Dario Vale's arm stayed locked around her, and his other hand was cupped against the back of her head, as if he could shield it from a bullet that had already not come. And his breathing, which had been so impossibly steady through the gunfire, had gone ragged now that the danger was past. "It's over," Mara whispered. Her own voice shook. His didn't, and she didn't understand how. They're gone. It's over." He didn't answer. His heart was going against her like a fist on a door. "You're shaking," she said. "No," he lied. She felt it, felt the fine tremor running through him, the tremor he was using every ounce of that famous control to hide. The most feared man in the city was holding a plain woman on the gravel of his own courtyard and shaking like the danger hadn't actually passed. And she understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than the gun had, that the danger he was reacting to was not the one with the gun. "Why?" she breathed. "Why would you do that? You don't even... I'm nobody. I pour your coffee. Why would you put yourself... Don't." He stood, pulled her up by the wrist, fast, almost rough, as if he were furious with her. Except his grip was careful, the way you'd hold something you were afraid of breaking. And the carefulness ruined the anger completely. "Inside," he said. "Now. Dario." It was the first time she'd used his name without the sir. It came out of her before she could stop it, and she felt him go still, just for a heartbeat, at the sound of it. "Inside," he said again. "Quieter. Please." It was the please that did it. She had not known the word was in him. She went inside. If you love stories that grab you by the throat and refuse to let go, stay close. This one is about to detonate. They knew her real name within the hour. The shooter in the sedan had not survived, but the man in the passenger seat had, wounded, dragged from the wreck, taken somewhere Mara was glad she didn't see. And the man had a phone, and the phone held a message, and the message held a contract. She was made to wait in Dario's study while he and 2 of his lieutenants read it. The study was the room she had cleaned a dozen times without ever being allowed to look at the papers. Now she sat in a leather chair the size of a small car, hands folded, gravel dust still on her uniform, and watched the most powerful man in the city read something on a phone screen and go absolutely terribly still. "What is it?" she said. "Tell me. Please. It was meant for me, wasn't it? The car. It wasn't meant for you." Dario set the phone down on the desk. He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "It wasn't meant for me." He turned the phone so she could see it, though she couldn't read it from across the room. The contract names a target, a photograph, and a name. His eyes didn't leave her face. "The photograph is you. I'm nobody. There's nothing to. I don't have anyone. I don't have money. There's no reason anyone would." "The name," Dario said quietly, "is Elena Sorrow." The name hit her like cold water poured over her head, and the strangest, most terrible part was that she knew it. She knew it the way you know your own reflection caught suddenly in a dark window, without ever having decided to, without being able to not know it. The locked door in her mind did not creak open slowly. It blew off its hinges. The long hallway. "Count the doors, little one." The warm, low voice, her father's voice. She understood now, that was her father's voice. Oranges and gun oil. The woman screaming into smoke, and the name the woman was screaming was Elena, Mara whispered. She gripped the arms of the chair. The room had tilted. I know that name. I don't know how I know it, but Sorrow. She looked up at him. Wild. "What is that? Who is that?" He crouched in front of her chair, so that for once he was below her eye level, looking up. And the gesture, a man like him, lowering himself, steadied her more than anything he could have said. "Marco Sorrow," he said, "ran the east side of the city before I was old enough to shave. He was, for what we are, an honorable man. He kept his word. He didn't sell what he shouldn't. He protected his people." Something moved behind his face, old and complicated. "My father respected him. They were almost friends, which in our world is the most dangerous thing 2 men can be." "Was," Mara said. The past tense had landed in her like a stone. "You keep saying was. He had a daughter," Dario went on gently. "The way you tell someone bad news, you can see they've already half-guessed. A little girl. Everyone in our world knew about her, the way you know about a thing that doesn't concern you. And then 20 years ago there was a fire." His jaw tightened. "It was not an accident. Marco Sorrow died in it. And they said, everyone said, that his daughter died with him, that the whole line ended in one night, in the smoke." The smoke, the woman screaming. Elena. They put it about that she was dead," Dario said. "But they never found a child's body in that house. I know because my father was there in the days after." He looked. He held her eyes. "A dead sorrow can't inherit anything, Mara. A dead sorrow is just a tragedy. But a living one, stop," she whispered. "A living sorrow daughter inherits the claim. The territory. The accounts her father hid before he died, and he hid a great deal because Marco Sorrow saw the fire coming and he was a careful man. The blood right that half this city would still kill to erase." Dario's voice dropped. "Someone hid her. 20 years ago, someone took that little girl out of the fire and buried her name so deep that even the people who wanted her dead believed she was gone. They gave her to the state. They gave her a new name. They made her into nobody. Because nobody is safe, and an heir is a target. Mara was shaking now, the way he had shaken in the courtyard. "You're saying I'm her," she said. "You're saying I'm... But I don't remember. I don't remember any of it. I was 7. There's nothing there, just a hallway, and oranges, and someone telling me to count the doors." Dario went very still. "What did you say?" She lowered her hands. "Count the doors. So I'd always know the way out. A man used to say it to me, I think. I thought I made it up. I thought it was a thing from a dream. Marco Saro," Dario said slowly, "taught his daughter to count the exits of every room she entered. It was a story people told about him. A grown man teaching a 5-year-old to find the doors. They laughed about it. He was not laughing. He was looking at her like a man watching a ghost finish a sentence he had started. It was not in any file. It was not written down anywhere. It was just a thing that people who knew him remembered." The study was very quiet. "It's you," Dario said. "Elena, it's you." She didn't cry. She had expected, distantly, that she would cry, and she didn't. Instead, a strange calm came over her, the calm of a thing finally falling into the shape it was always meant to hold. "That's why," she said. "That's why someone wants me dead. That's why someone has wanted you dead since you were 7 years old," Dario said. He rose from the crouch, slow, and there was something in him now that had not been there before. A focus, hard and bright. A man whose attention had found its target. They thought the problem was solved 20 years ago. They've spent 20 years comfortable. And then, somehow, someone found you. She thought of Pia in the laundry, the old hand on her sleeve. "Run, before he remembers your face." "Pia," Mara said, "the woman in the laundry. She recognized me. She said she knew me. 20 years ago in this house with a different name." Her eyes widened. "She's worked here longer than anyone. She would have, Dario, if she recognized me. Anyone who was here back then could." "You spoke to her about this?" "She spoke to me. 3 days ago, she told me to run." Mara's hands had gone cold. If she figured it out, and she told someone, or someone overheard, or... Dario was already moving toward the door. "Get Pia from the laundry," he said to the guard outside. "Now, bring her here, carefully, and put 2 men on her." The guard went. He came back 4 minutes later with his face wrung. "She's gone," he said. "The laundry's empty, iron's still hot. Door to the service drive is open." He swallowed. "There's a phone on the floor. Smashed." And on Dario's desk, the contract phone lit up with a new message, and Dario read it, and Mara watched the temperature drop out of the room. The message was short. Dario read it twice. Then he set the phone down with a care that was more frightening than if he'd thrown it. "They have Pia," he said. "Because of me." Mara was on her feet. "Because she knew. They took her because she could prove who I am, or because... What do they want? What do they... They've named a time. Dawn." He looked at the window, where the afternoon light was already starting to lean toward gold. "And they've named the person who'll be holding the knife to the old woman's throat." "Who?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, and when he spoke, his voice had gone flat in a way she would come to recognize as the most dangerous sound he made. "My cousin's wife," he said. "Celeste." It made a terrible kind of sense, once he laid it out. And he laid it out fast, the way a man assembles a weapon he's used 100 times. Celeste had married into the Vale family 15 years ago. She had spent every one of those years smiling at a table that never quite gave her a seat that mattered. She was clever and starving and bitterness like that doesn't shrink with time, it concentrates. She had connections to the old families, including... It turned out the very people who had set the fire 20 years ago, the people who had every reason to want the sorrow line stay buried, the people whose comfortable 20 years had been broken the day someone, somewhere, recognized a plain waitress's face. Celeste had been feeding them. For weeks, maybe longer. And the moment Dario pulled Mara out of the kitchens and stood her in the corner of his study and threw his own body over her in the courtyard, the moment he made it unmistakable that this nobody mattered, Celeste had understood exactly what she was looking at. An heir, a claim. A way, finally, to make herself indispensable to the men who actually ran things, by handing them the one thing they'd searched 20 years for. She had taken Pia as insurance, the only living person who could put a name to Mara's face. And she had set the exchange for Dawn, certain, utterly certain, that when it came down to it, Dario Vale would do what Vale men always did. Protect the house, protect the blood, protect the empire, and hand over the waitress without blinking. She thinks you'll give me to them, Mara said. Dario turned from the window. She thinks I'll give you to them, he agreed. Will you? It came out small and direct, and it hung in the air between them, and she watched something cross his face that she would think about for a long time afterward, something that looked almost like pain at the fact that she had to ask it all. No, he said. That was all, one word. He didn't explain it, didn't soften it, didn't dress it up. No, and somehow the bareness of it was worth more than any speech. Then they'll come for the house, Mara said. You can't trade me, and you can't fight all of them and the old families behind them, not over one waitress. So we do the thing they would never plan for. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had on the first night, the woman who poured his coffee and stood in the corner and remembered everything. There was no fear in her face. There was something else now, something that had been buried under 20 years of being nobody and was beginning, finally, to stand up. Which is? He said, and Mara, Elena, told him. They want the sorrow line erased, she said, quietly. That's the whole game, isn't it? It's been the whole game for 20 years. A dead girl is a tragedy nobody talks about. A girl who disappears in an exchange at dawn is a rumor that fades in a month. They win by keeping me quiet. Yes, Dario said. So I get loud. She started to pace. The plan was assembling itself in her as she spoke, fast and clean, and some distant part of her marveled at it. Where is this coming from? Even as the rest of her knew exactly where it was coming from. It was coming from the man with the warm voice who taught a little girl to count doors. It was in the blood. You hold a meeting, she said. Not a secret one. The opposite. You call together every family that matters in this city, every name, everyone who'd ever have a stake in the sorrow claim, everyone the old families would have to answer to. You make it public as your world ever gets. And in front of all of them I stand up, and I say my father's name, out loud. I claim everything that's mine, the territory, the accounts, all of it, and I do it standing next to the Vale family. A dead heir can be erased, she said. A girl who vanishes can be forgotten. But a living sorrow, standing in the open, named in front of every power in the city, with you visibly behind her. Her voice did not waver. They can't quietly murder that. They can only publicly murder it. And publicly is how empires fall. Publicly, the other families start counting what it would cost them to let the old families kill a named heir under Vale protection. Publicly, I stop being a problem they can solve with one car at a gate. You would be the most exposed person in the city, he said. Standing in the open, every enemy you have in one room. I've been hiding for 20 years, Mara said. I've been small and quiet and invisible my whole life because invisible felt safe. And it got me a contract on my head and an old woman with a knife at her throat. Her chin came up. I'm done being a thing that gets handed across a table at dawn. If I'm going to be in danger either way, I'd rather be in danger standing up. She braced herself then for what she'd always gotten. The no. The you don't understand, let the men handle it. The careful hand on the shoulder steering her back behind someone bigger. She'd gotten it her whole life. She expected it now. Dario Vale looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the war table at the side of the study, the one she'd cleaned around, never daring to move the markers on it. And he pulled out a chair, not the chair across from his. The chair beside his. Sit, he said, and she understood. He wasn't putting her behind him. She sat, next to him. And they planned until dawn. There was a moment, somewhere in the dark hours, when the planning paused. They had mapped it all. Who would be invited, how the room would be arranged, where his men would stand, how Pia would be recovered in the confusion they intended to create, the dozen ways it could go wrong and the answer to each. Dario's mind worked like a machine, and Mara found that hers worked alongside his, fitting into the gaps, catching the things he assumed and she questioned. They were good together, she felt it and tried not to. In the pause, he poured 2 glasses of something amber and slid one across the table to her. You should be afraid, he said. Why aren't you afraid? I am, she said. I'm terrified. She turned the glass without drinking. I spent 20 years being afraid of nothing in particular. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being asked where I came from. Afraid all the time of everything in a low gray way that never stopped. She looked up. This is different. This is being afraid of something real for a reason with a way to fight it. It's almost... She laughed, surprised at herself. It's almost a relief. Dario looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd thought was dead. That first night, he said, when I asked what you wanted from me, and you said nothing. I remember. Do you know that no one has ever said that to me? He turned his own glass, not drinking either. In my entire life, everyone wants something. My father wanted an heir. My men want my protection. Every woman who's ever smiled at me wanted the safety of standing next to the most feared man in the city. Every single person I have ever met has approached me with a hand half out. His jaw worked. And then a waitress I'd never spoken to looked me in the eye in front of 40 people and told me she wanted nothing from me but to go home. He stopped. And you what? Mara said softly. And I have not stopped thinking about it since, he said, for 9 days. It made no sense to me. I built my whole life on the certainty that everyone wants something. Because if everyone wants something, then I always know what to give and what to take and how to stay alive. And you broke it with one word. He met her eyes. I had you reassigned so I could keep looking at you and figure out what your angle was. I was sure you had one. Everyone has one. A breath. You don't. You just wanted to go home. Now you know my angle, Mara said. I'm apparently a dead Mafia princess who can't remember her own name. That's a hell of an angle. It transformed his whole face. Get some rest, he said, instead of all the things that were sitting unsaid in the room. Tomorrow, you stand up in front of everyone who's ever wanted you dead. You should do it on more than no sleep. At the door, she paused. Dario. Yes, thank you for the no. When I asked if you'd trade me, she held the doorframe. You didn't even have to think about it. I noticed that. I notice everything. It's my one real skill. She didn't see the way he sat there a long time after, looking at the chair beside his, where she'd been. The meeting was called for the next evening, in the great hall of the Vale estate, and the heads of 9 families came because when Dario Vale calls, you come. They came in their dark cars and their dark suits, the powers of the city, suspicious and curious and armed. They were seated at a long table beneath the chandelier, where days before a waitress had refilled their water glasses unseen. They did not know yet why they had been summoned. The air was thick with it, the not knowing, the calculation, the loaded silences. Dario's men lined the walls, more of them than usual, and the family heads noticed and said nothing and counted. Mara stood in an antechamber off the great hall, and for the first time in her life she was not in a uniform. The dress was black and simple, and it fit her, actually fit her, cut by someone who understood her body instead of apologizing for it. Her hair was down. She looked at herself in the long mirror and did not entirely recognize the woman there, a woman who took up space, who did not curve her shoulders inward, who looked, she thought with a jolt, like someone you would not look straight through. Dario appeared in the doorway behind her, in the mirror. They're seated, he said. It's time. He paused. You can still... No, she said, and smiled at the symmetry of it, giving him his own word back. I can't still anything. We both know that. She turned from the mirror. How do I look? She asked, and then was surprised she'd asked, because she had never once in her life cared about the answer to that question. Dario looked at her for a long moment. Like your father's daughter, he said. It was, she understood, the highest thing he knew how to say. They had timed it precisely. Celeste was supposed to be at the Dawn Exchange. That was tomorrow, in the plan she thought was real, the plan she'd arranged with the old families. She did not know that Dario had moved everything up by a day. She did not know that the men who were supposed to be guarding the location where Pia was held had been Dario's men all along, 2 of them turned weeks ago. She did not know that Pia was, at this very moment, being driven through the front gate of the estate, safe, wrapped in a blanket, frightened but whole. Celeste only knew that she had been summoned to the great hall along with everyone else, and that she did not like surprises, and that her husband beside her was sweating. Dario rose at the head of the table. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. "You're wondering why I called you here," he said. The room stilled. 20 years ago, there was a fire. Marco Sorrow died in it. So, we were told, did his daughter, and the Sorrow line ended in one night, and the east side of this city was divided among the people in this room and the people who used to sit where you sit. He let that land. Some of you remember it. Some of you were there. 1 or 2 of you, and his eyes moved, mild and terrible, across certain faces, lit the match. The silence went taut as wire. "I have learned something," Dario said, "that changes the division of this city, and because it changes it for all of you, I am telling all of you at once, in the open, so that no one can later claim they were not told." He turned toward the antechamber door. Marco Sorrow's daughter did not die in the fire, and Mara stepped into the room. She felt every eye in the hall land on her at once. For one terrible heartbeat, the old fear surged up. "They're looking, they can see you. Make yourself smaller." And she felt her shoulders begin to curve inward out of 20 years of habit. Then she thought of the warm voice. "Count the doors, little one." She had counted them on the way in. She knew exactly where every exit was. She always had. She straightened her spine and walked to the head of the table and stood beside Dario Vale, and she said it loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "My name is Elena Sorrow," she said. "I'm Marco Sorrow's daughter. I didn't die in the fire. Someone took me out of it and hid me and made me into nobody, because a living heir is a problem and a dead child is just a sad story. I've been nobody for 20 years. She looked slowly around the table, meeting each pair of eyes, the way she'd watched her whole life without ever being watched back. "I'm done being nobody. Every account my father hid, every right that came down to me by blood, every inch of what was his, it's mine. I'm claiming it. Tonight, in front of all of you, so that none of you can pretend you didn't hear." A wave of noise, not loud, the families were too disciplined for that, but a hard rustle of recalculation, of stunned arithmetic. Mara saw it ripple around the table. A living sorrow, an heir, protected by veil. She watched the math change in face after face, exactly as she told Dario it would. And she watched Celeste's face do something different from all the rest. Celeste went white, then she went very calm, the dangerous calm of a person who has just realized the floor is gone, and decides to act before they fall. "This is a fraud," Celeste said, rising. Her voice was beautifully steady. "Some kitchen girl Dario found and dressed up. There's no proof. The Sorrow daughter is dead. Everyone knows she's dead. And this person is a..." She used the word, "the ugly one. The one from the note in the cleaning cart." She said it about Mara's body, loud in front of everyone, because it was the only weapon she had left, and she reached for it the way the cruel always do. And the room, the dangerous, powerful room, went quiet in a way that was not on Celeste's side. Because the heads of the 9 families were many things, but they were not fools, and they had just watched a woman they'd been told was dead walk into the most dangerous room in the city without fear and claim a fortune in level tones, and they had watched Dario Vale stand beside her, and now they watched Celeste reach for a schoolyard insult, and they understood, all of them at once, which of the 2 women in this room was actually powerful. Mara did not flinch at the word. She'd heard it her whole life. It had no teeth left. "There's proof," she said evenly. "My father taught me to count the doors of every room I enter, so I'd always know the way out. He taught me when I was 5. It was never written in any file. It's not a thing a forger could know." She looked at the oldest man at the table, a silver-haired patriarch who had gone very still. "You knew him, Don Castell. You laughed about it once. A grown man teaching a baby to find the exits." The old man's eyes were wet, suddenly, and ancient, and certain. "There are 6 doors in this hall," Mara said quietly. "I counted them on the way in. I always do. Ask anyone who knew my father what that means." Don Castell rose slowly to his feet, the oldest power in the room. When he stood, everyone watched. "Marco's girl," he said, and his old voice cracked on it. "God in heaven, it's Marco's girl." And he inclined his head to her. One by one, around the table, the others followed. Celeste moved. It was the wrong move, born of panic, and Mara, who noticed everything, saw it begin before it finished. Saw Celeste's hand go into the small bag at her side, saw the dark shape of the little gun, saw the muzzle start to rise toward the heir who had just ruined everything she'd built. Mara did not freeze. The locked door in her was fully open now, and behind it was not just memory but instinct. Her father's instinct, 20 years buried and intact. She moved, and Dario moved with her. But here is the thing that mattered, the thing the whole room saw and would talk about for years afterward. Dario did not shove her behind him. He did not throw her to the floor and cover her with his body the way he had in the courtyard, when she'd been a victim, a thing to protect. He moved beside her, the two of them together, she stepping inside Celeste's aim, jarring the rising arm with the heel of her hand the way some old training she didn't know she had told her to, and he closing the distance from the other side, his hand closing over the gun and turning it down and away. The shot went into the floor, the sound cracked off the marble, and then his men had Celeste, and it was over the second time in 3 days that it had all been over in seconds. But this time Mara was not flat on the gravel being shielded. This time she was standing. She and Dario stood over the disarmed gun, breathing hard side by side, and the whole assembled power of the city had watched the Sorrow heir help take down her own attacker. Dario kept one hand at the small of her back, not pulling her behind him, not in front. Just there, a steadiness, a witness, a choice made in the open. "She's mine," he said to the room, and his voice carried though he didn't raise it. Not to own. His eyes went around the table, and they froze on it. To stand with. Anyone who moves against Elena Sorrow moves against the Vale family. And you all know exactly what I'm willing to do. Silence. Heavy. Deadly. The good kind, now. The kind that meant agreement. One by one, the heads of the 9 families inclined their heads a second time. And this time it was not only to her. It was to them. Celeste was taken out a side door very quietly. Her husband did not look at her as she went. He was already calculating his own survival, the way they all did. Whatever happened to Celeste after that, Mara never asked, and Dario never told her, and she decided she could live with not knowing. Pia was brought to her an hour later, in a small warm room away from the great hall, wrapped in a blanket, her old hands shaking. When she saw Mara, saw her standing tall in the black dress, alive, claimed. Safe, the old woman began to cry. "I knew you," Pia wept, "the minute I saw your face. You have his eyes, child. Your father's eyes. I held you when you were a baby in this house, before it all went wrong, and I never dreamed I'd—" She couldn't finish. Mara knelt and held the old woman who had told her to run. The only person in the house who'd shown her kindness when she was nobody. And for the first time since the locked door blew open, she let herself cry too. Not for the fire, which she still couldn't fully remember, but for the little girl who'd been made into nobody, and for the strange grace of being, at last, somebody again. Later, when the great hall had emptied and the cars had carried the powers of the city back into the night, and the danger had thinned to something they could finally breathe around, Dario found her on the terrace. The city spread below them, lit and indifferent. The night air was cool. She heard him come and didn't turn, and he came to stand beside her at the rail. Beside, always beside, she had noticed since the war table. "You stood next to me," she said. "In there, when Celeste moved, you didn't put me behind you." "You didn't need a wall," Dario said. "You're not a thing to be put behind anymore. Maybe you never were. I just couldn't see it under the uniform." He paused. "You needed a witness, someone standing next to you, so that when you claimed your name, it meant something the whole room had to reckon with. That I could do." She turned to look at him. The unshakable man looked, for once in his life, like a man who did not know the next move and was making it anyway. "That first night," he said, "when you said you wanted nothing from me." A muscle in his jaw. The confession came out short and quiet and devastating, the way the truest things always do, from the people least practiced at saying them. "I've wanted something ever since. For the first time in my whole life, I've wanted something. And it terrifies me more than any gun ever has, because a gun I know how to stand in front of." He met her eyes. "This I don't." Elena Sorrow stepped closer. There was no hesitation left in her, none of the woman who'd curved her shoulders inward and made herself small to fit through other people's narrow doors. "Then we're even," she said, "because so do I. And I'm terrified too. A breath, But I counted the doors in this house a long time ago. I know all the ways out. She held his gaze. I'm choosing to stay anyway. He didn't kiss her like a man taking something. He kissed her like a man choosing, slowly, deliberately, in the open light of the terrace, where the whole house could see, where any guard who glanced up would witness the most feared man in the city give himself away. And no one would ever dare to laugh. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest and felt his heart going, too fast, human, the way it had on the gravel. You're shaking, she said. No, he lied. She smiled against him. Liar. Yes, he admitted. That too. But empires do not forgive an heir who rises from the dead. Across the city, in a room far darker than the terrace, an old man set down 2 photographs side by side on a desk. The first was decades old, cracked at the corners. Marco Saro, smiling, a little girl on his shoulders, the girl's small hand fisted in his hair. The second was new, taken tonight, through a long lens, from a rooftop. Elena Saro, in a black dress, standing tall beside Dario Vale on a terrace, the lights of the city behind them. The old man had lit the match 20 years ago. The old man had been the architect of the fire, the one who'd ordered the line ended, the one who'd slept soundly for 2 decades believing the work was done. He had not been at tonight's meeting. He never went anywhere he could be seen. He had only sent others and watched and listened. He looked at the new photograph for a long time. At the girl who should be Ash, at the way the Vale boy stood beside her, not in front of her, beside, which told the old man who understood power the way other men understood breathing, that this was not a thing he could solve with one car at one gate. This would take more. He picked up a phone, he made one call, he said one sentence, and set the phone down, and turned the cracked old photograph face down so he wouldn't have to look at the little girl who'd somehow climbed out of the fire he'd built for her. Elena thought the worst was over. The city seemed to whisper, indifferent, lit, holding its breath. She had no idea the worst had only just learned she was alive. Stay close, because the man who lit the fire is still out there, and now he knows her name, and next time he won't send a car.